All right, now I can jump in and introduce our amazing moderator for today, Miss Sunny Bray. Sunny Bray is the founder and CEO of Catalyst Collective, a consultancy equipping organizations with tools for better outcomes, greater impact, and increased revenue growth. She started Catalyst Collective in 2018 with the goal of changing the world through marketing, development, and technology services. The Catalyst Collective is equipping organizations with mission-critical resources. Last year, Sunny was named to the All-Star Board by Nashville Post Magazine. The Nashville Business Journal recently named her a 2021 40 Under 40 winner, and she became a mother for the first time. And her contributions to the community include she serves as the director for marketing for Women in Technology of Tennessee, the board of directors for the Nashville Food Project, and a member of Brain Trust, The Table, and Rotary Club of Nashville. She is an alumni of the Young Leaders Council and the Emerging Leaders. I'm happy to throw the floor to Miss Sunny Bray, especially once I find her and spotlight her today.
Thank you so much, Abby. I'm honored to lead this space amongst so many amazing leaders across our country. But before we begin, I want to personally give a shout out and a big thank you to Dawn Stone, Abby Janis, and Catherine Swanson from CNM, Terry Vo and Joseph Gutierrez for the planning process and execution of helping to make today possible and show appreciation for the work they do, not just in preparation for today, but every day. And much appreciation to our panelists for sharing their knowledge, their expertise, and their personal experiences. And also to our audience for taking time to be here to learn, be intentional in seeking ways to be an ally and taking steps towards action for a more inclusive and equitable world. So with that, I will begin by introducing Joseph Gutierrez. And I'm happy to introduce him. He is the program officer at the Dan and Margaret Maddox Fund. Joseph started his career as an English teacher in South Korea, before relocating to Nashville in 2014. In 2017, he graduated from Vanderbilt University with a master's in community development and action before joining the Maddox Fund. He also serves as the executive director of AAPI Middle Tennessee, an Asian and Pacific Islander serving nonprofit working towards racial justice by supporting API communities. And we are thrilled to have him here today.
Hey, that's kind of like a mouthful of stuff, but yeah, I wear a lot of different hats. But today I come as the executive director of Asian Pacific Islander of Middle Tennessee. So I'll go ahead and share screen real quick. And I wanted to just do some level setting for some of the stuff we have and the panelists that are set to speak a little bit later. Honestly, they'll provide a lot more insight and stuff, but I just wanted to provide some level setting just because, there's not even like an agreed term for who we're talking about underneath this identity. So I really just wanted to start there and think about a little bit going forward. So I'm happy to send these slides out to anybody. Just shoot me an email or a message and I can send them your way. But just to start, API Middle Tennessee is working towards racial justice by building API community, lifting API voices, and unpacking API identities. And here's me. There's some things I just kind of want to note too that, I'm Filipino. Both my parents are immigrants. They moved to California in the mid 80s. And then that's where I spent most of my time before moving to South Korea and then here to Tennessee. Just to unpack our mission just a little bit more on what we do, because it's this three-pronged mission encompasses a lot, but there's a lot of stuff to do here for our community. But one of the first things we do is we're building community, and part of that is through creating connection through monthly events like the happy hour, and then we also have an event calendar for Asian Pacific Islander events on our website as well. The next kind of piece we do is we lift API voices, and part of this is part of our marginalization is rooted in being made invisible, so we want to lift the voices of our community. We're doing a community listening project over the course of this next year and trying to define what a regional agenda for Asian Pacific Islanders looks like here in Middle Tennessee. And then we'll be launching a More Than a Menu campaign. This will be a restaurant-focused meal campaign, recognizing that a lot of people actually connect with our community through culinary arts. So we're trying to bridge the gap and have people recognize there's more to just the food in front of them, that it encompasses a culture and a history of peoples. Finally, the last part of our mission is unpacking API identities. We want to acknowledge the diversity within the Asian Pacific Islander identity and celebrate our culture. So one of the key kind of things that we're doing is the Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month art show at the end of, or later this month. It's actually May 22nd in East Nashville at Riverside Revival. It's on those links that I sent, and I'm happy to provide more details for that if you'd like to come. But now, just to start, there's a lot of terms and a lot of phrases and a lot of acronyms that people actually have to talk about and think about when we're talking about this population. So some of the ones I want to unpack here is that probably the most recognized one you'll see is AAPI, which stands for Asian American and Pacific Islander. One of the older terms right underneath it is Asian and Pacific American. And then I just want to stop here and note, like not everybody even subscribes to these identities, right? Like there are folks in geographic regions and from cultures and identities that don't necessarily would identify. So these things are kind of just in the abstract, and that they're more socio-political than they are really reflective of a history and a culture and an identity. Some other ones that I want you all to familiarize yourself with is NHPI. You'll see that tagged on a lot, but it's Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. One of the things to really lift out there though is that oftentimes Pacific Islander identity and culture and their issues gets wrapped up in Asian American identity, but that's not actually true. So it's like kind of recognizing that it's important to lift up Pacific Islanders and their causes and their issues in very critical ways, because while there is some overlap, like even thinking about, between my own culture, like between the Philippines and other Pacific Islanders, there's different histories and different kind of parts that are part of that. One of the newer kind of like acronyms you'll see here, and this as well is APIDA, and that stands for Desi American. It kind of reflects though this kind of inclusion of some South Asian identities and making sure that they're part of this. So geographically, because I think that's actually one of the ways to really think about our identities. When you think about like in painting in broad strokes, you can think about East Asia, which will probably encompass what most people probably think about at first when they think about Asian identity. And this would include China, Korea, Japan. Then there's Southeast Asia, which other people are probably familiar with. They just might not subscribe to that term, but that would include sort of like Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia. And then South Asia is a geographic kind of thing. And this is where it gets a little bit more blurry, but this would include the Indian subcontinent, which would include India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And then South Asian also is like a UN term. So it would also include like Iran to some extent, but like, or some places where people might consider the Middle East. So it's just something to kind of recognize that, the UN comes up with this designation, but people, right, the cultural distance between like my own culture of the Philippines to that of like India is just as far as your own. So recognizing that, this kind of acronym and identity encompasses like a third of the world's population and a new global majority, but it's a lot, right? Because Asia oftentimes gets considered as a country, not a continent. So that's kind of some things to recognize there. And then just the other group, again, also is the Pacific Islands. So this would include like Hawaii, Samoa, Guam, Micronesia, Tahiti. Now to jump to kind of like what Asian Pacific Islander marginalization is. Oh, sorry, before I get there, it's kind of like a misnomer because we use API Middle Tennessee as the acronym. And just to take that note there, we intentionally made that decision as an organization to drop the second letter A for American, because we thought American is actually pretty exclusive here in the South, right? So not everybody here is American and not all of our community is. And it's something important to recognize as we sort of combat and fight for our own liberation. But our marginalization here is, the marginalization of Asian Pacific Islanders is kind of rooted in two axes. One in being made invisible, and second in the construction of the perpetual foreigner. And a lot of this gets really tied up in the model minority myth. And I want to unpack this here because it is like a sociological term and some of that, but it's a collection of stereotypes that are harmful, and it perpetuates this idea that all Asian Americans are successful. And while like at initial glance, somebody might ask like, well, how is that wrong or how is that bad? Well, ultimately, it flattens our identity. It perpetuates our invisibility and foreignness, and actually hiding the issues that we're kind of facing, right? Like we're not thinking about, how like Thai and Lao students here in Tennessee have some of the lowest high school matriculation rates in the country. We're not thinking about, the fastest growing group of people facing poverty is Asian women. right? So we're not actually thinking about that when that kind of gets subsumed in this like model minority myth. And then there's other parts that like are damaging for that too, but I want to unpack that a little bit more just by looking at this sort of idea of invisibility. So it's a reduction to a single identity, right? Like the idea that even a term like AAPI could encompass the wealth and diversity of our peoples is like very false, and it's perpetuated here. Another thing that kind of happens too is that we get lost in the statistics, particularly here in the American South, right? When we talk about like COVID rates, right? When we're talking about COVID rates for different communities, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders don't even get counted as a separate group, right? And then sort of that too, it's like, particularly here in Tennessee, right? Like the discourse is so different than coastal regions because our population is much smaller. Like the demographic reality is so different from like, what it looks like in my hometown of Los Angeles, right? Where Asian Pacific Islanders are really only 3.5% of the population here in Tennessee. And then finally, like this erasure of our needs. One of the things too, I think, when we think about the nonprofit sector, and something kind of think about is that, our needs don't get acknowledged. And the best way to kind of really show that is, that for every $100 in the nonprofit sector, only 20 cents goes to Asian American Pacific Islander led organizations. And again, right, like, because that number sounds so ridiculous, but for every $100, only 20 cents goes to Asian American Pacific Islander led organizations. Here, I also want to note like this perpetually foreign idea because it's rooted in sort of a lot of history of this country. So historical exclusion, and I want to just name this here outright, like this is racism, right? But thinking about, the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Page Act, which like actually barred, or legislation that actually barred coming into this country. It's important to name the Page Act really, because that's actually one of the first pieces of legislation that actually is like focused on like race. And what it did was it actually barred Asian women from coming to this country, particularly so it would like disrupt the family unit and would prevent like actually like when Chinese laborers came over to America, preventing them from bringing their families over and settling here. One of the topics that we're going to be talking about later today too is the bamboo ceiling. This is also tied in the model minority myth. And by the bamboo ceiling, what we're talking about, is that despite maybe some statistics that will show like Asian Americans having higher than average levels of income, we're actually quite invisible at the highest levels of executive leadership, oftentimes getting passed up for jobs and thinking about that sort of leadership position. And the bamboo ceiling also doesn't like take into account, that Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander women are making 66 cents on the dollar for their white counterparts. So really thinking about, that, not everybody's successful in this sort of like capitalist modes of thinking about income. But there is something to really think about, that, we're not present in your leadership. And there's some reasons for that, partly tied to labor in like this model minority myth, right? It was the construction and idea that, particularly Chinese labor that was building the railroads were good workers because they were quiet and just worked hard and were focused on the work. So you'll have this construction that, Asian Americans are good workers, but not good leaders. And I want to push back against that, especially with the panel here who leads in the community every day. So I think, that's important to hear from them. And then finally, a lack of representation is one of the kind of things in like this perpetual foreignness, even in thinking about other immigrant causes, right? Like we might not, when we think about immigrant refugees, oftentimes even Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders get left out of that, right? In DACA discussions, we're not talking about how Filipinos and Koreans are in the top 5 like recipients of DACA, like nationally. So there's a lot to unpack here and like sort of how we're made invisible and foreign. So that's just something to think about. I also want to note that, Asian and Pacific Islander identity is very gendered in that sort of way. And I think it's very important to name, how Asian and Pacific Islander women face like fetishization and exotification in very real ways that continue today and perpetuate harm. Some other things around the model minority myth is that it's a means of preventing racial solidarity. So when the Black civil rights movement was actually really taking on, one of the things that people tried to do was try to drive a wedge between different ethnic groups and cultural groups to created solidarity. So really like the term even model minority myth emerged in the 60s from sociologists who were trying to perpetuate like this idea that, that Black civil rights activists were bad people, right? Because the assumption when there is a model minority, when there is a good minority, that there is one that there's bad, that is bad, and that's not true, right? So it's just really driving a wedge, and it also like falsely assumes that we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and like this sort of capitalist mentality is perpetuated there, which isn't true, particularly when we look at like the current realities that our community faces today. You know, like around COVID, this idea of being outsider. And I will say like a recent kind of like poll actually just showed that more people today still blame China for the public health crisis of the pandemic. More people do that today than at the start. So it's really thinking about, you know, how we're constructed and our identities kind of looked at. So some things to do, and I just want to leave you with this, is like unpacking the myth, is to evaluate your own stereotypes and really see people in their wholeness. You know, like I think there's a lot of historical barriers to unpack with that, like even with my own name, right? Like Joseph Gutierrez, I have a Spanish last name, and like that name imparts a colonial history that continues to obfuscate who I am today, right? So like on paper, like I present as Latinx, and like it doesn't actually show that identity of who I am really in my own culture and history. So it's really trying to see people in their wholeness, recognizing who they are and their histories and their peoples. And then, you know, our path to collective liberation is in solidarity. So ways that you can stand in solidarity with other groups and really, you know, thinking about, you know, my own organization, API Middle Tennessee, very front and center, we stand up and we're fighting for racial justice, right? So that's, we center that in our own work and really thinking about how we're going to, what our pathway forward is. And finally, stay in touch. Here's my website. Follow us. We got a bunch of stuff going on later this month for Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Feel free to email me about anything. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And you know, like that's kind of like one of the weird parts too. It's like some people don't know how to navigate those conversations, like asking people about histories and stuff like that. But you know, that's what I'm here for. So really thinking about, you know, if you need questions, I can find answers. We're API Mid-TN on all the socials. And then that QR code. But again, just follow us. Find out where I'll link around in the chat, but thank you all for being here. And I wanted to also say thanks to all the panelists. We're going to share and be open and really thinking about, you know, because it's difficult to talk about these things sometimes. So really, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joseph. All right. So before we begin, I just want to do a quick reminder to all the panelists to make sure that you speak at a pace that the interpreter can keep up with. Just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind. But let's go ahead and get started with our first session on model minority myth, how the AAPI community is looked past in DEI conversations. And for this first session, I'd love to introduce Chris Chu, Michelle Boyden, Matt Paco, and Kimberly Spradlin. Chris was born and raised in Hong Kong and moved to the States at the age of 16. At the age of 27, she co-founded a company called Electronic Vaulting Services. EVS was named top 100 fast growing startup, and Chris received the top 40 under 40 award by Memphis Business Journal. Chris is active in the work community as she leads the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity initiative across the East area. She also co-founded the ID&E Community Mentorship Program, is the Healthcare and Life Science Community of Interest Leader, and Tennessee's Amazon Cloud Community Leader. Michelle Boyden. Michelle serves as controller for the franchisor company of the Smash My Trash brand, which is a national franchise mobile waste compaction service with locations operating coast to coast. Embracing the core values of integrity, innovation, and growth, Michelle is involved in various organizations within the community and state society, serving as a member of emerging leaders and leadership cabinet. And Matt Paco. Matt Paco is a travel video producer for Lonely Planet and a board member of the Asian American Writers Workshop in New York City. Previously, he has been a producer for NBC, MSNBC, MTV, PBS, and Nickelodeon. Matt founded the LGBTQ+ alumni organization at the University of Virginia, where he went to college. He currently lives in Nashville, owns a bakery with his husband, David, and then Kimberly Spradlin. Kimberly is the executive director and acting chief of staff at Second Harvest Food Bank of Middle Tennessee in Nashville. She has a passion for fostering the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. She is a proud wife, partner to the executive producer to the Bobby Bones Show, and they are parents to 2 children and 2 rambunctious pups. Thank you all for being here. Let's get started. Start with the first question. When was the first time you realized that the model minority myth was indeed a myth? And how did you grapple with that? Who wants to take us from here?
I'm happy to start us off.
Thanks.
I think with me, I lived in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and I didn't realize racism against my own Asian American heritage much because I'm half white and colorism comes into play, and I didn't experience it much growing up. But moving to Nashville December before the pandemic, I realized that my Asian American heritage was going to be something that came up a little more, especially with those who I shared my Chinese and Filipino background. And as the pandemic came on and I heard more of this racism that came with the Chinese virus and then the effect it had on Asian American women, it became something that I was passionate about. We lost jobs more than other minorities. 1 in 4 Asian Americans experienced unemployment after the pandemic. And we have the biggest inequities when it comes to our race. The 90-10 rule of inequity for Asian Americans, the top 10% of us make most of that money. And then the bottom of us are struggling with getting by, especially after the pandemic and coming from industries like hospitality and the service industry and cosmetology. It severely affected our communities. And being in Nashville is a lot easier to forget it's happening. And then you connect with family that are in places like San Francisco and New York and Los Angeles, and it is heavily affecting our community. And how do we get past that and realizing it's happening, especially during the pandemic, that came to light more than ever in my life. So I think a lot of Asians experienced that for sure.
Thank you, Kimberly. Matt?
You know, it's so interesting because like here in Nashville, like just because there aren't as many Asians, I haven't experienced as much like, like racism towards Asia. What's strange is I came from New York before and I actually experienced more there than I did here. When you ask the question, when do you realize it's a myth? It's funny, like the perception, because like this is a kind of funny story. In New York, people always assumed I was a delivery boy. It was hilarious. Like I used to work for MTV and I would be in the elevator and someone would ask me a question, where's HR? And before I could answer, he would say, oh, you wouldn't know, you're a delivery boy. And then I'm like, actually it's on the 34th floor. And like one time I took a cab and so the cab driver turned around and said, I didn't know delivery boys took cabs. I'm like, I'm taking home food from like so it's weird because like, you have that perception like we're all successful, but there's the other side, like people assume you're like, a certain type of person. So I think the first time I realized growing up as a kid is like when I traveled, when you're a young kid, you hear the title model minority myth and you think, oh, we are successful, whatever. But then when you travel and you see other parts of the world and people perceive you like as a Filipino, people perceive us differently in like Europe and the Middle East as you would maybe in the United States when your parents are in medicine, which my parents are. So it's kind of, it's weird. Like, I think when you travel and you see that people perceive you a different way depending on where you live, like New York, they perceive me differently from here in Nashville to when I traveled in Europe. So it's weird. It's about perception in many ways.
I'll kind of piggyback off of what you said, Matt. So I've grown up in Indiana my entire life, and I'm actually married to another Filipino. He's a Filipino American, but he looks like he's a Filipino, and he's taking actually over my father's business, which is one of the top 5 largest minority businesses in the state. And he was at a construction event, for example, and everybody was there. He had one of his top lead superintendents, and they were Hispanic, and he also had another sleeper that was also Filipino, and they opened up the floor with, where is all the minority in business consultants here? So that I kind of thought that was interesting, and how they didn't really look to Filipino as being included in terms of diversity and being qualifications for a minority business. So myself, I work in the accounting profession. I personally haven't had too many negative experiences because, and again, one of the stereotypes is Asians always go to the accounting profession. So I kind of walked into that, but it's, to me, has worked in, a positive manner. I've been seen in a positive light in terms of the hard work that our background and what we're known for. So I've seen both positive and negative in terms of both my husband's experience and my own. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How do we fight those API stereotypes? Chris?
It's tough, I think, living in Tennessee.
Oh, Chris, can you hold on one second? You're a little fuzzy.
I am.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
I'll kind of
No worries.
Oh.
Thanks, Michelle.
No worries. So I guess how can we fight that every day? I guess the main question I'm always asked is, where are you from? And to me, that's technically an incorrect way of asking. I always respond with, oh, are you asking about my ethnicity? And they're like, oh, your nationality. And I just learned this actually. Nationality is where you're from, so region. So technically, our nationality is United States, but really it's ethnicity. So I kind of try to correct them and say, oh, my ethnicity is Filipina. So that kind of helps break down, the understanding of where you're from. It's just such a wrong way to approach somebody when they're interested in in knowing what your background is, but kind of correcting them in terms of the proper way to approach it.
I agree. I think the other one, the follow-up question is often, well, where were you born? With the assumption of, I was born in South Korea.
Exactly.
I think one way is just to make sure we're seen in all different ways. One of the ways that the past year, I mean, that's a question you're going to probably ask, but wanting to be seen, I joined the Asian American Writer Workshop this past year because for me, it's kind of I think for people to understand who we are, they have to see us in all different places. And so I joined the board because I just didn't just want to promote writers who are novelists and poets, but also screenwriters for television and movies. And what's so exciting right now is seeing these different Asian stories, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, and Never Have I Ever, or The Boys I Never Loved Before. All these kind of young Asian stories, or Asians, you had the Crazy Rich Asians, but also the one with Everyone Everywhere All at Once is about immigrant Asians. It's all these stories, and I think by showing all these stories, for us telling these stories and having a seat at the table, that helps us fight the different myths, because it shows that we are a diverse community with different voices and different economic backgrounds and stuff like that as well.
I think you make a great point that celebrating our contributions is something that is really amazing to see as we come into different industries, especially in Hollywood, and coming through and having a Marvel superhero that is an Asian American, and having movies that are focused on our culture. It is a celebration, and that sheds light on the success we've had and the contributions we've given. We aren't this model minority, we are part of American culture now. And that's a really wonderful thing to see. I think with the stereotypes that we face, being specific to leadership and having leadership within organizations is something that I hope we can really start to challenge. We represent so much of the workforce when it comes to technology, when it comes to hospitality, when it comes to the medical industry. How do we support our Asian brothers and sisters in being leaders and being leaders within the community? I joined nonprofit because I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to take my college degree and my history in corporate America and make something more. And I'm realizing that Asian Americans don't even utilize nonprofit services in the same ways others do, because we just aren't educated in the fact that they're there, and we lean on each other. So we, even as a culture and as a community, are still learning how to break stereotypes and how to access help outside of our communities. So I think it comes not only from highlighting and celebrating our success, but also bringing that education into our own communities and helping our family members who are struggling and showing them resources. I go home and I'm like, you don't know, but the food bank is there and it's offering all this for you in San Francisco. And they're like, I had no idea. And that those little things are things that we are going to start doing and helping and supporting in our communities. And it's really wonderful to see our generations change and progress.
Thanks,
I
Kimberly.
couldn't agree more. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Technology. I think I've seen that Crazy Rich Asian movie like 25 times because I just love it so much. It's really representing our culture. I couldn't agree with you guys more. I know that I've dropped off a little bit, but I think celebrating our culture and celebrating our success and for all of us stick together, it's really, really important because that's the only way we can strengthen our generational bonds and really change and shape the narrative of our future. That's the only way to me to change the game. Even just locally, I think, for example, like, hey, Chinese New Year's, I think we all can celebrate with each other for our culture. So it's, you know, Korean New Year could be a different date, but we can come together, celebrate. So I think that's really the only way we can collectively fight the API stereotype.
Thank you, Chris. I'll move on to the next question. How do you experience or handle daily microaggressions that may surface? i.e., we kind of already got into it. Where are you really from? Or things along the lines of model minority expectations, a lack of understanding of diversity within diversity of AAPI individuals, identified individuals, visibility or lack of visibility.
I'll share a story of my 75% white, 25% Asian children spending time with their family in California. And on multiple occasions, my sister or my mom have been thought of as the nanny or the babysitter. And those microaggressions on my children, I think as a mother and as a child who's culturally, I was raised purely Filipino, it's very hard to raise children and then have them face those little microaggressions, specifically when you have the change coming with mixed race children. And how do we help and support them embrace their cultural diversity and support their family when they're with them? I think about raising teenagers and how to help them support their family and love their aunts and their culture, and then tell others how to respectfully say, this is my grandmother or this is my aunt. And those microaggressions, when it comes to just people not thinking before they speak, are really adding up as I raise my kids.
I will share, for me personally, the microaggressions were honestly things I had never really noticed. I think it took the last couple years that really made me a little bit more hyper aware, and in turn allowed me to be more vocal and to speak up when I do hear those aggressions.
I agree with you, Sunny. I was not as aware, like you were saying, and really, it's my 7-year-old who's really brought it to my attention when she's at school and she comes home upset, and I ask her what's wrong, and she tells me that one of her friends doesn't want to play with her because she looks different. And really, this is kind of piggybacking off of question number 2, how do we fight these stereotypes? It starts with what we instill and teach our children. So really, it was a perfect segue to opening up to teaching her more about where we came from, our culture. And that year, we actually ended up taking her to the Philippines. So she got to experience that. This was a couple years back, but she's super proud of her heritage now. And so anytime anybody says anything about her being different, she proudly talks about, her mom and her grandma and how they came over here and they worked hard, and that she wants to do the same thing for generations to come. It's just very cool to see that, I guess, come into play in the younger generation.
You're such an amazing mother, Michelle. I'm going to go off script a little bit. That actually leads me to a thought and a question that I have. Were any of you raised being told that you look different, that you may experience discrimination? as you kind of navigated and into your adulthood?
Yes, I would say so. It's interesting because my family, all of them are in medicine. And so there was this expectation you'd be in medicine. And there was that pressure. And it was funny because I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to go to college for journalism. And my mom's like, we're not gonna pay for it. You have to do one thing, And so I ended up like, well, maybe I'll be a diplomat because I do love international stuff, which is why I work for Lonely Planet. And so I studied international relations, which was kind of, to work for the UN. That was the dream. And then in the end, I end up working in journalism anyway. It's kind of like, because at the end, you'll do what you want. And so I feel that, a lot of times our parents, because they want us to be they want us to be safe and taken care of and not like feel as much discrimination. But if you're like in a very stable job and a job with a lot of, prestige, maybe a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, they feel that that's very stable and will protect you. And so, yes, I definitely felt that pressure that I'm different, therefore I need to do these things to be successful.
I can
I
piggyback on of that because I'm in technology, and I felt like every time when I go tell people like, hey, I'm in technology, including my own parents, they think I fix computers, which I don't probably like far from knowing how to fix computers. So that's such a pressure, to your point too. It's not only from our own parents, but also from the relatives, that they expect you to be, hey, you're Asian, you must be a doctor or a lawyer. Other than that, they don't really, almost like they don't approve.
My saving grace was I was gay. So I was like, okay, you're the black sheep. You don't care what you do. So I was like, all right, I can do whatever exactly I want to do. So that's what led me to be able to be a journalist, because I'm like, no one cares.
I'll share a little story. I remember growing up and my mom specifically telling me, you look different. You are different, but that's okay. You're beautiful the way you are, but you may experience people treating you differently. And I think that was only coming from a place of protection on her end, given how she had been treated as a first generation Korean American coming to the US. And so I understand the protection, but I think it kind of set the standard as far as what I may expect and how people would treat me. All right, let's move on. Unless anyone else has anything else to share. Given the heightened xenophobia and racism toward those perceived to be AAPI, what has been the hardest part about the past year?
I would say I no longer would walk on the street at nighttime by myself, even I feel that Nashville is a safe place. But because of, the circumstances and what's going on around the globe, I no longer feel safe being Asian, walking on the street by myself. And also my parents went to New York to visit my other sister. And I was so nervous when they told me, like, because, they're from Hong Kong, they live in Hong Kong, they're so used to walking around every day. They said, okay, I'm going to go outside, me and your dad going to go take a stroll because we can't locked up in the house. And I was really nervous for them. I mean, I'm way younger than them. I can protect myself, but they're close to 70 years old. And I was really afraid that they get attacked, like all those news that I have witnessed on TV.
Absolutely, Chris. I think you and I shared yesterday in our conversation that with majority of the attacks being on elder Americans, I had a deep concern and fear for my own mother, who is 77 years old and lives in Columbia, Tennessee. It wasn't so much me and my personal health, safety, but more so for my own mother.
For me, it was just realizing how vulnerable our community was, I guess because you live your life, you don't realize, you just think everything's fine. And then you realize how vulnerable we are on that daily level, in the sense of like, coming from New York, hearing about, especially women, older ladies being attacked, which is like, how is this person a threat? Like, that's the thing that I was just so angry last year. Like, and then that story about this one being attacked and these doormen at this luxury hotel building, just watching it happen. I was like, what is wrong with people? And besides that, just like how vulnerable we are, especially like in China. I know a lot of businesses in Chinatowns throughout the country were closed. Like half of Chinese restaurants in the United States in 2020 closed. Maybe a lot of these business owners don't understand like what's out there. Like, the government was there with like the PPP to help like business owners and restaurant owners to stay afloat, and maybe they didn't know about this or understand how that works. So you just realize how vulnerable we were, and so that was really hard.
I'm not sure which video you're referring to, because there are so many, which is disgusting. I
Yeah, there were
follow.
many. It was
Yes,
like, it got to a point where every week there was like another one, and I'm like, what is wrong with people?
I follow an Asian reporter on Instagram, and she posted a video of the woman in, I think it was New York, being attacked in an elevator by a Black man. And I stumbled upon it, and I went back and I watched it several times. I don't know why I kept doing that to myself. And then I found myself getting emotional about it.
And even like in Atlanta too, what happened here with those ladies in those salons, it was like, it was just, and it was real. It really hit me when there was a reporter from Atlanta like reporting on it, and she was like weeping, and it was just so like, wow. I mean, to do a spin on it, the one thing that it has done is it's kind of forced us as a community to kind of speak up. I mean, that's the reason why I decided to join the AAPI. And I know there are a lot of initiatives now in companies to kind of push for more Asian American representation. Like in like where I work, they're like, there's a ERG trying to get Asian American employees to kind of have a voice and like hear what our issues are. So I think, even though this horrible stuff happened last year, I think it's been an impetus for us in our own community to step up and say, we need to do something about it.
And also getting past that fear and trying to find the light after all those events happened. My mom and my aunties were like, oh, you moved all the way out to Tennessee, we're going to come visit you. And I was like, I don't know if now's the time. I don't know how safe you'll be here. I don't know what the culture here is like when you go to Dolly World and all these places. I just had this fear of like, I didn't want anything to happen to them because I was working and they were going to do these things on their own. And they came back to see me after going to go all around Tennessee on their own. And it was 5 Filipinos on their own with 4 children and their grandkids, and they had an amazing time. And they said everyone was very kind to them and that they didn't experience a single moment of being uncomfortable. And to hear that, because they were masked up in places that weren't masked up, and I was so incredibly stressed and worried and fearful of their safety because of the events that were happening all over my social media, that they were not as inclined to care for that. And they weren't on Instagram and they weren't on Facebook. And not that any of it didn't happen, but in the sense that their sense of safety was still there, they were able to truly enjoy this place and experience it and have that light. And so I try to remind myself after that happened, like it feels so real for us because we're all so in tune with the world and we're so in tune with what is happening across the country. And then we see our elder generation being embraced by a community. It does show that there is light and there is kindness out there. And it's hard for us to remember that and celebrate it today when we saw so much negativity and hate over the last year. in the mainstream. So it's so hard to bring back that positivity when we remember how hard it was, especially being away from family. But that's just shedding a little light on a positive story that happened 6 months ago when masks were coming down, but they were still masked up. So there is some positivity in light. There is some warmth sometimes when we look around. It's just hard when you're watching and seeing it all happen live sometimes.
Thank you, Kimberly, for allowing us to end on some light and positivity. That is actually going to lead me into my last question. And if we have some time, maybe open it up to the audience for a few as well. What does allyship mean to you? And how can allies show up for you or show up for the API community? Chris, go ahead.
I'll share. I think it's super important. I think it's super important. And also, I'll tell a quick story because I know it was up at time. I have a manager boss that I have been working for in the last 10 years. And I'm always the only Asian on his team. And I follow him to 2 different companies. But the reason why I think allyship is so important, and especially our life and career, is he constantly share my background. He go around and tell people like she's from Hong Kong, she didn't speak English when she came, and her work ethic and all that. It's almost like he is sponsoring me and sharing my culture to people. I think that's really, really important, and it made a very big impact in my career. So I think that having them to align with us and helping us to share our culture, share our stories, it's really making a good impact. So that's my experience.
I would say allyship is definitely the key to unlocking the power of diversity. Part of that starts with us, being open to learning about other cultures as well, so that we can promote each other, and being proud of what, where we come from. To me, the easiest segue is probably food. So I always bring egg rolls, to group events, and it opens up a great topic of conversation because most of them are wild and always will crave egg rolls forever. And it really just gives me the opportunity to talk about a little bit about my background. So really taking advantage of those opportunities and finding friends with other cultural backgrounds as well, to promote each other, learn more about it, and really embrace, each of what makes each of us different. And yeah.
Thanks.
I think it's going to be in appreciating community involvement. I don't, in high school and college, my mom didn't really understand me wanting to be a part of like social services. And when I went to nonprofit, she didn't understand why I did that. But I think bringing the Asian community into these kind of organizations, into the API that Joseph stated, his organization, I think that is something that I'm still helping my younger cousins understand, to get involved in the community. It's not as common, I think, when I was growing up, to hear of that involvement, and hopefully we can encourage this next generation to get involved and to be involved with our organizations and helping represent one another. I think that's something that I'm really passionate about now that I wasn't when I was younger, and hopefully we can keep that going, and helping them support one another and support the community and educate is going to be huge.
Just to jump on that too, I mean, allyship, it's about showing up. It's like your friends, these people showing up. And I think it's reciprocal. So I think we also need to show up. Like,
Yes.
When the Black Lives Matter thing happened, like a lot of Asians stood with that too. It's like, as a person of color, we understood that all our lives matter, like as people of color. So we need to like help each other out. So I think it's important for allies to come and stand with us, but we also have to stand with them too.
Thank you guys so much for sharing and for your time and being here and just talking through your personal experiences. We appreciate you all for being here. We're going to break for 10 minutes and rejoin at 11:25 for our, I'm sorry, it is 11:55 for our next session at 12:05, which is session 2, the bamboo ceiling, structural racism in the growth of organizations and individuals. And we will be chatting with Stephanie So, Kit Canlis, and Prabir Dash. you guys can stay with us for the remainder of the time, we'd love to have you. Otherwise, we will see you guys at 12:05. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our session 2, the bamboo ceiling, structural racism and the growth of organizations and individuals, where we will be joined by panelists Stephanie So, Kit Canlis, Prabir Dash. Stephanie So is a social scientist at heart who wants clarity about definitions, measures, problems, and practical solutions. She is the co-founder and CDO of Geek. Stephanie is a vastly experienced technologist and economics expert. Next, we have Kit Canlis. Kit is the vice president for the Association of Asian American Investment Managers, a 501c3, whose mission is to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the investment management industry and increase access to capital for people of color and women. Prior to joining AAPI, she was a sales executive for technology brands such as Google Cloud and Eventbrite. She also served as founding board chair for Asian Pacific Islanders of Middle Tennessee. And Prabir Dash, after graduating in engineering from India, he came to the US with a Science Foundation scholarship. He has a master's degree in mechanical engineering and worked as a stress analyst to help build nuclear power plants. He is retired after 30 years at Raytheon and settled in Franklin, Tennessee. Currently, he writes songs in one of the Indian languages for the music industry in Eastern India. He also writes fiction in English and is in the process of publishing his first novel. Welcome. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks,
Well,
Sunny.
thank you. All right. First question. Have you ever struggled with not being seen as a leader at work?
As far as mine goes, since I worked as engineer, initially, ours is focused more on the technical side, and we gradually go up in the ladder. There are cases, there is a subtle discrimination that goes on. If if you are equal to another person, and then you have to be provide a little bit extra to the corporation to go up. It's not nobody will come out say why you are not picked for that position, but it's understood. So you always have to do a little bit more than the other guy to go up. That's my experience.
I can speak. This is Stephanie. Hi, I was in academics for my first career, and I think even though I'm fairly headstrong and I like to go out on my own, academics is very hierarchical, and not being seen as a leader really means that for me, that people just expected you to do well, not make any trouble, do good work, and in doing that, they sort of put you in a class of, okay, we're just going to expect you to perform over here. And then we're going to take all the ones with more identifying, more familiar people to take leadership roles, you know. So I did see that.
Yeah, it's it's actually really comforting and also discomforting to hear my counterparts on this panel to say a lot of what I have felt in the past. So I come from a tech sales background, and it wouldn't be surprising to a lot of the folks on this call that technology and sales is very male and white dominated. So similar to what Prabir was saying, you know, entering that culture, I kind of expected that there would be this element of a double bind, not only as an Asian American, but also as a woman. And so I think stepping into those spaces, I anticipated that and kind of forced my way into a lot of conversations and tried to reframe, you know, that just because this particular style of leadership or these particular cultures around drinking or sports or whatever it is have been the norm, it doesn't mean that that's how it needs to continue to be. And, you know, in this age, the last, you know, 10 years or so, where DEI is really being held as more of a corporate and cultural standard for organizations, you know, I think a lot of people are wanting to check the box. And so there's a little bit more accountability when I would approach my sales leaders and say, hey, you know, all of our sales engineers are white, or why is it only men in leadership positions? And addressing those things up front, I think is very helpful. So just knowing what kind of culture you're stepping into and being prepared, you know, to unfortunately work twice as hard, but also have the open conversations. And it helps if they are indeed open, right? In front of people that, you know, are allies, other people of color, other women.
Kate, I'm so glad that you have that conversation with leaders on the front end. I had a meeting with a local corporate bank the other week, and I will not say who they are, but the CEO seemed to be very proud that they had a diverse staff. And he kept saying, we're very diverse. And I looked around the room and he was referring to gender diversity. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
No,
somebody?
no, go ahead.
Now, I would just give you an example of when I was going up in the ladder. I approached I reached a stage where the next step is going up in the management level. So when you go to that thing, you know, when you apply for that management job, it came back to me. They'll come and say, Prabi, you are so good technically. We need good people in technical side. And the line then comes, aren't you Indians are excellent in mathematics? You guys are so good engineering. When you hear that, you hear how you are being put in a particular caste, a particular mold, saying that that's what you are, you should stay there. Why are you trying to get into the management level? You will do so well in that side. Don't come and try to be on the management level. That belongs to just some people. So that's there. I don't know whether it still exists or not. I'm retired for 10, 15 years now, so I don't know if it still exists. But I don't see the change really. It needs to be changed.
Sunny, do you mind if I tell the story of my dad?
No, go ahead. Please share.
My dad was an engineer, so Prabir's story made me think about him. He was an engineer and who also went into management. And he did that because he knew that an engineer's path was just not going to have the same kind of income growth. It was very compressed and competitive. So management was the only way to really make a leap, and he had to start over from the bottom of the management ladder. So I can kind of think about what Prabir said, and that reminds me of something that Kit said, which is that what I learned from my dad is that when he made that decision, he negotiated very strongly up front. So that's sort of what Kit was talking about. You know, you have to get to a point where you have this very clear dialogue with yourself that you're going to have to go in there strong. And so his job was to take on a project, and if he succeeded, he would get to leap up 2 levels instead of just get promoted 1 level. And I remember when I came to my job at Vanderbilt, I was told, like everybody, you better negotiate well up front because that's it, right there. That's where you're going to stay. And I did. And I think I just encourage everybody to take that to heart, that if you're going to be pigeonholed as someone who's good, those opportunities to negotiate may not just come to you. And there are books out there that say, you know, go back in there and negotiate, but sometimes it's better to do it up front.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I'll ask the next question. What has your experience in accessing mentors been?
So I'm happy to kick this off. So the reason I actually transitioned to my role at AIM, very long, Association of Asian American Investment Managers, like the longest nonprofit name ever. So we just internally call it AIM. My decision to go into this organization was a very intentional one, coming from the tech and sales industry. And being laid off during the pandemic, like many people were, I took a lot of time to reflect and say, well, what really gives me energy? Do I really want to go back into this hustle and grind? You know, what is my purpose right now? And I think with all of the racial uprising and this really, again, it being at the forefront of conversations at the organizational level, I thought, you know, this is my time to really talk about the things that I care about. I had never even, I was exposed very little to Asian American leadership, let alone working underneath a lot of Asian American professionals. And so I thought, you know what, AIM is an organization comprised completely of Asians. The 2 co-founders were both women. And I decided intentionally that I would dive into this world of financial services that I knew nothing about, purely for the purpose of having Asian American leadership. And I remember, you know, we have an annual conference every year, and we have like the top people from major organizations in venture capital to, you know, large public pensions, just across the board in finances, where I was saying to myself, these are all prominent, successful, trailblazing American Asian leaders, a lot of women. And then the other people that are here are the next generation who hopefully will also encourage that, right? So I think it takes a little bit of, it might take a little bit of hunting, right? Because unfortunately the representation isn't the best. But I think it's definitely there if we can find it. And, you know, not just mentors, but sponsors, finding, you know, deciding up front, I'm not going to settle for somebody that is not, that where there is not a sponsor in my organization or a person that's willing to be a mentor, because I think it's equally important that we interview the places where we're going to be as much as they're interviewing us.
I think we naturally migrate to those that remind us of our younger selves or those that perhaps look like us. I currently have a mentor who looks nothing like me, And she's wonderful, and she's very intentional about taking action towards creating more diversity and equity and inclusion. However, not everyone is like that, and not everyone sees that. Someone shared with me the statement recently of people of color are often over mentored and under sponsored. And so to your point, Kit, I think it goes further than the mentorship. It really is having someone who can advocate and sponsor you in those rooms that you're not currently in, and to be able to create space and opportunities for others, to make it more equitable.
I hadn't even thought about that yet. I was still on this mentorship question. And so it's really interesting that you and Kit bring up sponsoring.
I have a completely different experience on this. As an engineer working for a corporation, I used to work for ATM. We used to deal with government agencies. In our case, it's Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC. It's a friendly and sometimes very adversarial situation. It meant to be helping each other, but it turned out most of the time very adversarial. They will be looking for what problems we have and how to rectify it. But they sometimes go very aggressively, specifically in the 80s, when there was so much anti-nuclear thing was going on, movements was going on. Anyway, after a particular meeting where I was completely bitten up, made a mess out of me after facing a whole group of NRC engineers. After the meeting, I was so broken down, disappointed. I was just coming out. Then one NRC vice president, they walked in, he put his arms around me. Then he took me around and talked to me and said, if you think this is beating up, you don't know what's a real beating up takes place when we do it. This is just a regular thing, don't take it to heart. And from then on, we developed a good relationship. He was my mentor almost throughout my career. I mean, we both helped each other. But I took him as a mentor, and he taught me how to be a mentor to others. So when junior engineers came in, when I moved on to moved from engineering to management, I tried picking some people out, some stars, and tried to be helpful to them. As you know, there was a particularly one lady engineer who worked for me. She was the only lady engineer in those group at that time. We still keep in touch.
Thank you, Prabir. That leads me into my next question, and you've shared a little bit already. But can you think of a time that an ally or an advocate really stood in the gap for you? And can you share that experience?
I already told you mine.
Yeah. Kit, Stephanie, do you have any experiences like that?
I'd love for Kit to go first.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. So, yes. So, I'll share with you all that, this was probably about 5 years ago. I was working at a startup company in East Nashville where, unfortunately, I was sexually harassed and bullied in that environment. And I reported that, and I actually was fired. And so going into my next role, I was mortified. So scared of building any kind of relationship, would have panic attacks. And I was forced essentially I had to tell my sales leaders because it was really causing me grief. Like I would have to leave the sales floor. I was very scared to speak to people. And the director of our sales sector said, it's hard because it's just lip service. It takes time to understand whether they're actually going to be an advocate for you. But, and he acknowledged that. He said, I know I can't do anything up front that will make you believe that this is who I am and that I have a particular standard for my sales floor, but let's give it some time. And there just so happened to be a transition for a new chief operating officer for our entire company. And we were a new sales division. And so she wanted to get in touch with every organization that represented different brands, Oracle, ours was Google Cloud, and so on and so on. And he could have picked a manager or somebody that was more tenured. I had been with the company for I think at this point it was maybe 6 months. And he said, he didn't even tell me up front. I just got an email. And it said, you're going to meet with the COO at this time, and I want you to talk about the organization. And I sent him an email and I was like, hey, thank you so much. I'm not sure what you want me to say. And he was like, you're intelligent, just go in there, and just say whatever you think. I'm confident that you you can, basically let her know what we're doing, because it was a time when we were wanting to grow our particular sales division. So it was kind of like a little bit of a sales pitch, like, hey, let's hire on sales managers, engineers. And that was really meaningful to me, that he would pick me out of all people to be a spokesperson for our sales team. And I'll never forget that.
Thank you for sharing, Kip.
Yeah. I did not grow up with this idea of an ally. And so when I was thinking about this question, Sunny, I was thinking more about, and Kit's story sets this up perfectly, more about a couple of people in my life who have simply encouraged me to speak, like open my mouth and be audible and express an opinion instead of just agreeing with whatever it is and nodding my head. And I think having those people make me model to myself that it's safe to say something, and that they were interested in what I might have to say, not always, but was the best thing that anybody's done for me. And I've been lucky enough to have that enough to get some confidence. And the other thing I would say just very openly is I've had a lot of therapy. And so I think that, if you can't find an ally, you probably have some issues in your life. So that's hard. So I just encourage everybody to face those kinds of mental health things straight on. My parents wanted me to be strong and stoic, and I'm like, go get help as a different attitude.
Thank you for sharing, Stephanie.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I was raised to kind of be under the radar, to not necessarily step out and get the attention. And like you, I think I've been blessed to have a lot of people in my life that were encouraging and supportive, that may have seen things in me that I didn't always see in myself, and encouraged me to celebrate some of the things that I've done and to be proud of those accomplishments. And I remember a few months back, I had a friend that actually said, I think naturally, especially women, we kind of shy away from celebrating our achievements. We just don't want this whole like, look at me complex. But at the same time, we want to be proud of what we've done because we've worked so hard. And he said to me, Sunny, you could actually do a better job. You are not out there in the community as much as you could be. That you never know who's watching. There may be a young woman out there that sees you as an opportunity, that she sees someone that she could be too. And that just really resonated with me. And then I think now, after having my first child, a little girl, it really hits harder for me.
Sorry.
We'll move on to the next question. What do you want most Americans to know about the everyday experience of AAPI individuals as they experience the world and in organizations, etc.?
I think that I suddenly I have a lot to say. Everybody's bringing these thoughts up, but I'll try to be fast. I think that being brought up to fade in the background and then trying to overcome that. I think what a lot of people don't understand about me, I've had a hard time understanding it, is how much my heritage has worked against celebrating. In fact, my family, my mom in particular, taught me to catastrophize, which is a word I learned probably in a self-help book or something, where you're always anticipating the worst and you're always trying to prepare for the worst. And people will say, oh, that's great. Have you thought about, this next challenge? And so I think, what would I like people to know? Just because I used to be quiet or somebody is quiet doesn't mean that there's not a lot going on that they're dealing with. And that's what I had to say.
May I go now?
Yes.
You said you have what to say. That's not a lot. We are still waiting for more. But nah, seriously. Well, most of the faces I see here, they look like second generation, or maybe some of the few are right from here, third or fourth generation. I am a first generation immigrant here. When I arrived in 70s, all I had in my pocket is $8 and a small suitcase in my hand. That's all I have. That's all I could bring into this country. Of course, I had my degree behind me, which my mother country provided. So that's not the thing. Is being a male, from the culture I come, and when I arrived, it's not that different. I was taught that women can be emotional, artists can be emotional, doctors maybe can be emotional, but an engineer cannot be, a mathematician cannot be. So you have to bite your tongue, hold your emotion inside, and have a tough Teflon skin. People will say things to you, you have to just let it go. You don't react to it. After in this country for right now, I'm too long. I'm arrived in this country early 70s. Some of you probably are not born then. So when a 30-year-old comes to you and says, go back to your country, I ask him how long he been in this country. I've been longer than you. So who's the real guy here? You are here only for 30 years. I'm here for longer than you. So you will get that thing that not only is the society and the environment that you are in your own work environment also you face it. Just tough it out. Tell them how it is. Don't be like me. Don't bite your tongue. Go back up. Go at them. Face them. Don't take it lying down. That's not the age we are in anymore. We're in a different century. So wherever you are, face them, talk them down politely, but talk them down with logical arguments, not being careless at it. So face them, then you can win. Don't take it lying down anymore. And it's more to the women. This is your time. Okay, so don't take it lying down anymore.
I couldn't agree more, Prabir.
Yeah, it is so great to hear everyone's kind of wisdom and experience. And I think kind of the two things that I would say is one, the model minority myth. I think there's a lot of people that think we over-index in very specific industries, STEM or business leadership, whatever you have it. I think having some data in your back pocket to say why we still deserve to have affinity groups, diversity funding for our professional leadership too. One statistic that was shared with me recently at a different kind of Heritage Month celebration was that 10 out of 20 million make it to become Fortune 500 CEOs. 10 Asian Americans out of 20 million make it to become Fortune 500 CEOs. But I think that there's an impression that we're over-indexing in businesses and corporations or whatever it is. And I think the data speaks a lot to when people hear the numbers, they can't compete with that. So there's one piece that I would say. Another that I would say is just to leave people here with a little bit of a tool. There's a book that I read earlier this year, and it's called Turning Your Adversity into Advantage. And it's by Dr. Laura Huang, who's a Harvard business professor. She talks a lot about how marginalized people, women and people of color specifically, often experience a line of questioning that is what she calls diminishing questioning, where it's like, what are your risks? How are you going to achieve this product or service or whatever? What's going to make you successful? And she says that a lot of people in dominant culture are asked things like, what's your vision? How do you see your company scaling? The good news is that there is also research that shows when you confront that diminishing question, answer it, and then move on to the question that you actually want to answer, which is the line of questioning around growth, it actually leaves a larger positive impression on somebody. So if you have an accent or you look young or whatever it is, you can say to someone, this is research-based, I know I have an accent. A lot of people think that I'm not good at communications. Here is and then you go on to cite examples of where you were a great communicator. Or I know I look young. This is how much experience that I have. This is how long I've been doing something. And I think that's something that we can use as marginalized people, or perhaps people in this call that are part of dominant culture, to recognize and move through those conversations while we're still trying to have the larger DEI conversation. That's a small tool that we can do to try to have a little bit more control over our trajectory.
Thank you so much, Kit. I'm glad that we're ending this session with some powerful tools to take with us. I want to thank you guys for being here today and sharing your personal experiences. And I think taking this space also to learn, as you mentioned, Stephanie. We're going to go right into our next session, which is session 3, Asian Hate and Resilience, where I will be joined by Emily Yu, Ben Park, Josh Ford, and Terry Vo. All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Emily Yu is a broadband program specialist for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration within the U.S. Department of Commerce. She works on the Broadband Infrastructure Program, which recently awarded more than $277 million to connect more than 133,000 unserved households to high-quality internet access. Before NTIA, she worked in the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development as a broadband grants manager. Emily is a proud alumni of Vanderbilt University and resides in Boston. Welcome, Emily. Good to see you again. Nashville misses you. Next, we have Ben Park. And according to Ben, music making is a creative, therapeutic response to the human condition. Included in that response are the rewards and defeats of 21st century adulthood. These days, Ben Park happens to express this worldview through original folk and alt country songs. Next, we have Josh Ford. Since becoming a sales director of Eli Link, a training company that helps organizations solve the problem of bad behavior in the workplace, Josh partners with clients across the globe, including nonprofits like Susan G. Komen, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and he resides in Greater Indianapolis with his family and enjoys coaching youth soccer and volunteering for the Westfield Youth Association program in his free time. Josh, great to have you. And then finally, we have Terry Vo. Terry is the External Affairs Manager at Comcast. In her role, she oversees government relations, community investments, and partnerships throughout Tennessee. She also manages special projects and programs that support digital equity through unique partnerships and enterprise-wide initiatives. She was recently named a Woman of Influence and Top 40 Under 40 by the Nashville Business Journal. And she's also Nashville's Top 30 Under 30. And she serves as chairman of the board of AAPI Middle Tennessee. Thank you guys for being here. Let's get started. It's important for non-AAPI people to see us as being in solidarity. How have you seen yourself stand up for other communities, not AAPI?
I can go ahead and start us off. I love that this question's being asked. I think it's a crucial point to be brought up. I think sometimes in the AAPI community, we can be looked at as maybe being a little more uninvolved in certain causes. And, you know, I think that goes along with kind of this upbringing and belief that we need to keep our heads down and just keep doing our own thing, try not to rock the boat. And Joseph mentioned this earlier on his presentation. I think that can sometimes lead to us being an underrepresented minority and then not really bringing it up or speaking on it. So I love that this question is being asked, like I said, being in solidarity. And I think in terms of coming or standing up for other communities that may not necessarily be API, it's, you know, it's in those conversations that I've had with people in my own family, within my own culture. When, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement really came to a head in 2020, I think there was a lot of confusion within at least, you know, my Korean family and culture into what really the essence of that was about. So I really think it can be found in the nuances of those conversations of how you are, you know, working against these systems of oppression and also being in solidarity with others. I've also had conversations about LGBTQ plus community, and for Korean people, my Korean family, they can tend to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to those social issues. So really, you know, kind of pushing back on certain things that they say and making sure that we're all aware of you know, the language that they use and resources that are out there to better navigate those types of topics.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily, for just kicking off with that. I couldn't agree more. I think right now what's so pressing, right, is Roe v. Wade. Just last week, I was at the protest downtown, and I think it's so important that it's not just race, right? When we talk about non-AAPI, it's about our human rights, it's about healthcare access. And so I think it's really important. And for me, it's making me think, yes, with that, it's about everyone standing up. It's about men speaking up, especially. And then for sure, thank you for talking about the LGBTQ community. For me, I serve on their board and I'm an ally. And I think that's so important because it's about allyship. It's about learning about different communities that you may not relate to, but being there and learning about them is so critical. And I think that is really some of the examples I have pushed myself instead of, being behind the scenes, but really challenging myself to be out there and to do things.
I think that's spot on. We really need to be in solidarity for respect and inclusion for all types of people. And I feel that's one of the responsibilities that we really have as a community to really remove hate and the barriers. I'm lucky enough to partner with organizations daily who are trying to align behaviors with values within their own organization. So that means I get to partner with DEI councils, affinity groups, HR professionals, and legal to really help curate that workplace where everyone can do their best work. And one of the things that I learned is that if we're not being intentionally inclusive, we're unintentionally being excluded,
Thank you for sharing. Where do you see anti-Asian hate in your spaces?
In the news, sadly enough, just the instance a couple of days ago, right, in social media, maybe the looks that you get as you go into the grocery store. Maybe some of the actions are unconscious by individuals. Sometimes they're very much conscious.
Yeah, and I know for us, being out of school and removed, but for me, there's definitely been that still in the classroom. We're seeing it, my nieces and nephew, they've experienced that. And, that makes me so sad for the future. You always want that it will improve. And so that's been really harming to me. And I know I hate to bring this up, but sometimes even in your own, I would say even my own friend spaces, right? They can be very casual, right? Whenever you can't pronounce someone's name, right? And you turn it to a joke. These are microaggressions that are still a form of hate. And I think that's something really important because hate doesn't have to be violent, right? And I think we are so accustomed to seeing that. And just like Josh said, through social media, but they can be very subtle. They can be almost, like the invisible part, which is even more harmful because then they're perpetuated over and over.
Right. I agree, Terry. Very subtle and still kind of have this element of invisibility. I had a friend once make a statement to me and say, you're not really a minority. Or, and I think, Terry, I shared with you recently, I was at an event and there were two white male speakers, and somebody had asked a question about products from China and how the US was heavily reliant on China for XYZ. And I almost felt a spotlight on my forehead that everyone in that room was looking directly at me. Emily, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I totally agree with Terry. When that term Asian hate comes up, I think people think about these huge news stories where something very violent and graphic has happened. But there's these other instances in which it's more of the microaggressions, it's more nuanced. And then I find myself struggling with how to deal with those because it's easy to call out the shooting that was in Atlanta or Michelle Go in New York. It's very easy to be, of course, that's terrible. We have to stand up against that. But then when it comes to other instances, if I wanted to speak out against something that's a little, more subtle, am I going to be looked at as dramatic or crazy for bringing up something that is so seemingly trivial? And so that's a whole other, I think, aspect to this that I myself have struggled with and am continuing to struggle with, but definitely another facet to Asian hate.
Do you ever feel like, again, off script, but just going with the flow of the conversation, do you ever feel in your communities or in your friendship circles, when you have these conversations and you bring up these topics of these personal experiences that you've had, do you ever feel like it just gets kind of brushed aside? I can share a personal experience as well to get us started. I'm a part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion membership organization, and its mission is to create opportunities of prosperity for people of color. And in our table discussion, I brought up the microaggressions against Asian Americans and how I encourage people to really do their own kind of search and education on how Asian Americans have just a history. And it was almost like it was just completely brushed aside. And then you take Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, this month leading up to the month of May, I personally reached out to several publications in our community, making them aware of this month and if they had any type of plans or ideas around highlighting Asian American leaders or business leaders. And it was almost like crickets.
Yeah, Sunny, I so appreciate you sharing that. And I wanted to share a positive story. So because I think we've got to balance both and like how
100%.
those experiences happen, because I noticed, right, I would say in our community here, you see a lot of like Pride nights, which was awesome and is great. And then I recognize that, wow, like we never do anything. I've never seen anybody do like an API Heritage Night, with our sports teams. We have professional sports teams. And so I had a conversation with the person who, was a decision maker with one of the sports teams. And I'm really proud to say that, the month had passed, but they said, no, let's follow up. And this year we had the first API Heritage Night with the national like professional sports team. And it was historic. And I think it's kind of those examples that they're little, right? It didn't make national news, but that's not the point. It was the people in our community that finally saw themselves, that could be highlighted, that they were important. And that, and what's neat is that even on the sports team, there is someone Asian and they were able to share their story. There was someone on the team that is also Asian that was able to share their story as a coach, right? And oftentimes I would say most people would have no idea. And if we didn't provide that space or have that conversation, maybe it would never happen. And so I think that's the encouragement for all of us. I know sometimes it's scary to call out people. And I think it's important where we come from, because it was a place of wanting to grow our city to be more inclusive. And I think that's really great. And I wish, I had like a more positive story, but with my friend group, I had a conversation about the Atlanta shootings, and they kept deflecting that because the women were working in spas, that they were not valued. And it really was really hurtful to me, because I was like, she was an Asian woman. Like, I'm an Asian woman. We actually identified the same. And it was really hurtful, because it was like, then you judge someone by what they do or how, yes, exactly. Like classism. How is that different? Because how would you know that, right? What if I was there that day? I was going, and having an appointment. And I think those are the things that we really need to reflect on ourselves. And I think for me too, is that I am also capable of racist statements and racist thoughts. And I myself am working through that myself. And so, with those conversations, I really tried to speak up, and it's really hard. But I've really pushed myself to keep having those conversations. And I know for those of you all, if you've had a bad experience or you've been discouraged, please know that we've all been there, and that, just know that you have support from others like on this panel, and that we just have to keep persevering in solidarity.
Thank you, Terry.
I think growing up in a Midwestern rural community with Caucasian parents, I almost felt like I was on an island. I was one of the only Asian kids in a graduating class of 500 individuals, and the two other Asian Americans both had parents who were Asian, so that they had some more, I felt like, connections. And as we progress, I think it's so incredibly important for us to continue to try to build bridges, because I feel like some of the action and not welcoming of concerns comes with that model myth that we were talking about earlier, right? They're just going to keep their head down, and, are we going to value their voice when they speak up? Right. So I think it really goes beyond that, and in really trying to find the commonalities that we have as humans and as people, right? We can list all the differences in the world that we have, even together in this own virtual room, but what can we do to continue to build bridges and find the commonalities that we have with all people?
Thank you, Josh. That takes me to my next question. We've asked this in a few of the other sessions, but I'd love to hear from the three of you. What does allyship mean to you, and how can allies show up for the API community?
So I'll tell a story here that's also positive. We love the good vibes here, but I remember back when the shooting in Atlanta happened, I had an old colleague reach out to me and, ask how I was doing, and that in and of itself I think is great. I know it's usually put out there on social media and Instagram. It's like, reach out to your BIPOC friends and make sure they're okay. And they can sound a little hokey, but to me, it meant a lot that she was reaching out. And she said, I've been thinking a lot about this. And I remember back when we were on a work trip together, and a certain situation happened where there was a microaggression in a conversation with someone, and I just didn't take to it very well, and I didn't appreciate it. And in the moment, I kind of stood up for myself and said something, and then went on from there. But and that had happened, I think, 3 years before she had texted me. And so for her to be thinking back to that and be self-reflecting in that way, that meant the world to me. And I think that's just really all what it comes down to. Again, it's just taking a look inside of ourselves, working through that. Terry said she's doing it. I mean, we're all working on ourselves right now. And to have allyship be a part of that, and thinking about how you show up for other communities, I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think a couple ways to really show up as an ally is to educate yourself, right? Know about our experiences, and don't ask API individuals to go and share their harms or their experiences. Go and read it. Go to pbs.org. There's a whole 5-hour series about Asian Americans that I could not recommend more. Do the homework. I think that is a huge step in allyship too. Just like Joseph said at the beginning, think about it. All of us, many of us, and especially in Tennessee, right, we're the volunteer state, we give, we just had the big payback. Every $100, we're talking 20 cents. 20 cents, right? So whenever you think about the next place you give or the next organization you give, think about an API one, add to it, right? It doesn't have to, it's not you're taking away from anyone else, but maybe consider giving a gift there. And 3, join, like be a part of organizations, right, that you don't identify with or you're curious about. And, for me, support their events, go to them, share about them. So I think those are really great ways to be an ally.
Thanks,
I'm
Carrie.
thinking about some of the earlier conversations today and, helping people understand how to frame their curiosity from the right lens, right? Where were you born, and helping them really understand and give them the benefit of the doubt in the same instance, right? This isn't coming from a malicious place, but they're genuinely curious potentially about me. So help them understand that process as well. The last thing that I have around allyship is that sometimes our biggest allies don't know that there are allies, right? It's that person that we respect and completely trust. And sometimes they don't know that there are allies, and just having a close friend that you can really trust upon, who might not know they're the ally themselves, but that you can count on them, is something that's paramount as well.
Very great point, Josh. Thank you.
Oh, and Sunny, can I add something real quick? Because I was
Of
living in
course.
Australia and I was an international student. So I didn't know this, but of course, many Asian students go to Australia and go for undergrad, go for master's degree. And so I was out one afternoon with my friends and someone asked me that question, like Josh said, it's like, where are you from? And my friend stepped in and I was like, you don't have to answer that. And I think for the first time in my life, like as an adult getting my master's degree, I was thinking like, oh yeah, like, I think you're so accustomed to like when someone talks to you or you feel like, you have to answer them. And he kept pushing it. It was really, it was very odd, and my friend stood her ground and she was like, you don't need to answer that to me. And then we were able to walk away from that incident. But in that moment, it helped me so much because I realized too that I don't owe any individual, like if I don't feel comfortable answering a question either, when they ask me something. And so that really helped me because in that, I think, like Josh said, I don't think she was thinking she was being an ally. She was probably, just like, why are you even
Stand up for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And it helped me to recognize that. And so I think a lot of learning moments I was able to learn from that, which was very helpful.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you touched on this earlier. You mentioned a resource, but do any of you have suggestions on where to seek further information on learning more about the API history, culture, and experiences?
I'm a big reader, avid reader. I love books. So that and even if, I mean, the books I'm about to mention, they are fiction, but I think they do provide a lot of insight into different Asian experiences. But just reading more from API authors, I have loved any of the books by Min Jin Lee, so Pachinko or Free Food for Millionaires. Pachinko is actually being turned into a series on Apple TV, which is very exciting, and we love the representation. And then podcasts. There's actually a whole, I think, feature on API podcasts on Apple Podcasts. If you go to sort of their Explore page, and one of my favorites is Asian Enough. It's put on by the LA Times, and they just interview a bunch of API community members, and it's a great way to be in the know of what's going on. And there's also a bunch of others on there as well of more historical information as well.
Yeah, I've got lots of suggestions, but you can go to asianpacificheritage.gov, right? There's Asia Society. I think one thing that we haven't mentioned a lot too is that was mentioned earlier, but about self-care and mental health. So on Instagram, you can follow Asian Mental Health Collective. And it was very helpful to me just to see others in that space, because I feel like we're always, I feel like my own experience growing up, I didn't really have time to ever process or unpack my feelings, and you just cry and then move on. And so it was really helpful to see that all of us need that space, no matter how old you are. And I'd already mentioned the PBS series, but also I think one thing when we're talking about the future, Asian Lit for Kids is really cool. It features like children's books that has characters of Asian and other like biopic identities. And then for me, just learning about more about my Vietnamese heritage, I listen to the Vietnamese podcast. And I do want to shout out Diana King. She is a photographer here locally, and she did a series called Almost Asian, Almost American. And it was featured, oh goodness, I can't remember the fashion magazine, but I really encourage you all to look at that and read that, because she was able to connect with many Asian women and talk about their experience of being almost Asian, almost American, from all different voices and backgrounds. And I think it's a really great insight into learning from all of our experiences, because they're all so different.
I just looked it up. It's an in style.
Yes, it is.
Thanks so much, Terry. I'm excited to check it out. Thanks for sharing. All of you, Emily, Josh, we appreciate you. I think you've added so much to this session and just sharing your experiences. And can't wait to see you again soon. With that said, we're gonna go ahead and move into our meditation and processing space with Jennifer Wang. Jennifer Wang will be leading us in meditation and processing, and we will be in breakout rooms of 3. Jennifer Wang has been a regular practitioner of mindfulness and meditation for over 15 years and has the fortune to practice in various traditions, including Theravada, Insight Tradition, Shambhala, and I cannot pronounce this, Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village Tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and she is the co-founder of the Nashville POC Sangha, a facilitator at One Dharma Nashville, and serves on the board of API Middle Tennessee.
Great.
Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers and to all the participants. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I wanted to provide the opportunity for us to have some conversation first before we jump into any sort of kind of internally facing exercise. Kit is one of the co-facilitators of the Nashville POC Sangha, which Sunny mentioned. Just to share a little bit about that, we founded that space as a meditation space just for people of color, so that we could come together in solidarity, having a space to look at our own minds, become friendly with our own minds, where we don't necessarily have to adapt as we might in a space where there's people of the dominant culture. So it's just really a space for more intimacy and healing amongst people of color. And as I said, Kit pasted that link in the chat. So what I like to invite us to do before we go into the breakout rooms, so we'll be in breakout rooms in groups of 3. And if you don't feel like chatting in a breakout room, that's fine. You can just reject the breakout request and you'll stay in the main room and we won't be talking. Is just to start to process what we've heard today. We've heard so much really good information, maybe some information that's touched on a personal experience that you've had or that you've heard from a dear friend or a family member. So maybe some stuff is getting roused up in your mind and your heart. And that's wonderful, actually. That's really great, because the way that we make change is to start with the heart. And in Buddhism, we think of it as heart-mind, as one conjoined organ. So the prompts that I'd like to offer for the breakout discussion before we move into them, and I'll paste them in the chat as well, is what is one thing from today's event that's creating a pleasant reaction in you? And there may be a lot of things that are really wonderful. If you could try to just pick the one that stands out the most as pleasant and to allow that some space. And then what is one thing that's creating an unpleasant reaction? So one pleasant reaction, one unpleasant reaction. And we'll have some conversation around that. It'll be completely confidential within your group. So we'll come back afterwards, have a little bit of comments in the big group. But again, if you would like to share, just share from your own personal experience. And as you're in your group, I would just like to invite you to practice mindful listening. So listening with your whole self, with your whole body,
and seeing if you can really feel the other people as they're speaking. A lot of times we tend to kind of plan what we're going to say as somebody else is speaking, and then we miss half of what they said. So even if that means when you start to speak, there's a little pause, see if you can listen with your whole body and really provide the generosity of your attention to the partners in your breakout group. And then the other thing is just to speak from your personal experience, rather than trying to represent a whole group or maybe give advice to somebody in the group, just to share your own personal experiences. That's really what this breakout group is for. And then one that I really love is to practice the mental exercise of both and. So you might be saying something or hearing something that you don't really jive with. And maybe it's a situation where both what you feel and what you believe and think can be true at the same time as what the other person is going through. It just represents the reality that there are lots of truths out there and lots of causes and conditions that lead to them. So maybe what I think is true may not be true for somebody else. And if you're in a group and you don't feel like talking, you have a right to pass. You can say, I don't feel like talking, I'm just here to listen. So you can do that, or you can choose to stay in the main room if you don't feel like speaking in the breakout room. And so with that, I'll ask Claire to send you all off. You'll each have 2 minutes to speak. It'll be groups of 3, 2 minutes each, and we'll give you a little reminder. Go ahead, Claire.
Just a question. Do you want the interpreter to stay in the main room or in a specific group, or how would you guys like us to do that?
I say y'all participate if you want to.
Okay.
I'm going to jump into room 6 because we have a few less people in that one.
Great. And as you start to trickle back into the room, just taking this opportunity to take a few deep breaths, land in the room. There's probably a lot of mental activity going on. So just feeling your chair, feeling the floor underneath you as we wait for everyone to gather. And just feeling your seat underneath you, feeling the earth underneath you, and just taking some deep breaths, acknowledging the room that you're in, acknowledging the people in this space. Maybe a minute or two, if anyone would like to share anything that's coming up for them from that discussion. Maybe just one or two comments, and then we'll move into a compassion meditation. And I'd just like to remind you to speak about your own experience rather than someone else's experience in your group.
I'll just share that I just made a comment that as an African-American woman, first of all, this discussion has been very, very rich, and thank you so much for hosting today. There's so much commonality, I think, amongst many of our communities, but it's really important to be educated about the various communities, and so this has been so helpful for me to learn more. And I also, mentioned there being grace, because we all don't know everything about one another, but the more we know, the better we can address our biases and treat each other better. So that was one of my takeaways.
Thank you, Marie. Feel free to just unmute yourself and share. If it gets too chaotic, then we'll go raise hands, but you can just unmute.
Hi, so I'm the guy who commented that I just moved from Hawaii, where Asian Pacific Islanders are everywhere. And it's a little bit terrifying, I'm gonna be honest and vulnerable, I guess. It's a little bit terrifying for me because it's almost like going from a place where I got to be a majority and not have to consider microaggressions and all of the different interactions that you were all sharing about. And now, noticing those things and not letting it completely jade me or have a negative reaction to everything, but just knowing that's something it's a new skill set I'm going to have to adopt. So really grateful for seeing that change I need to make, but also very terrified that it's like a whole new learning for me. So appreciate, and I've joined the API and everything else. So thank you for those resources, Terry. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for being here in the space with us. Maybe one more comment.
So I will just share. I always opt to moderate these conversations because I think that there's still so much for me to learn and grow and process myself. So I like to be the one that's asking the questions. I often feel like I don't have a whole lot to contribute in terms of just my education and knowledge regarding API to the conversation. But I felt very honored to be in this space today and feel like I learned so much.
Thank you, Sunny. So we're going to do a very short compassion exercise. If you like, you can close your eyes. If not, feel free to keep them open, maybe just relaxing that gaze a bit so you're not staring at the screen. And if you like as well, you can place your hand on your heart, just bringing some physical warmth to yourself. And just bringing a sense of care to whatever is going on in you right now. The pleasant thing that came up, as well as the unpleasant thing that came up. You can say to yourself, I care about it. I care about that pleasant. I care about that joy. I also care about the unpleasant, the upsetting, the painful. And this can be the first step that we take whenever anything comes up. Just to share care with ourselves. Now extending that care to everyone in this Zoom room, everyone in this meeting that has come together. Sending care to their pleasant experiences, their joys, and to their unpleasant experiences, their pains. You're now extending that care to all beings everywhere. Extending your heart to all living beings, human and non-human. Opening your heart in this very moment. No limitations. I care about all beings. Thank you for your practice and for being here. I'm going to hand it back to Sunny to close us out.
Jennifer, thank you so much for leading us in that meditation and process space. I think that was the perfect ending and the best way to close out our day of convening. I want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here, our guests, and really taking time out of your day to learn and support and to take action, to the CNM team for creating this opportunity and giving us the space to convene. You guys are amazing. And of course, to the ops team on the back end, handling all of the technical stuff, as well as our interpreters. And then, of course, I cannot leave today and end without a huge thank you to all of our panelists for contributing and sharing their experiences and their stories. Thank you all for your vulnerability and your authenticity and your leadership. A reminder that CNM will be sending out resources that were mentioned today, and that there are absolutely ways to get involved in the API community, both here locally and all over. So we hope to see you soon, and I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend.